Hello, and welcome to Getting Down to Business, a public affairs show talking about economic development and other issues driving business in Covington and Kenton County. I'm your host, Pat Frew, Executive Director of the Covington Business Council. Our guest today is Julie Kirkpatrick. Julie is Vice President of meetNKY, the Northern Kentucky Convention and Visitors Bureau. She's proudly responsible for economic development in the Northern Kentucky communities through meetings, events, and visitor expenditures. She's also responsible for the overall brand experience of Northern Kentucky as a destination of choice. Julie was raised in Lexington, Kentucky, and is a certified tourism ambassador for the Cincinnati region. She's also an executive Bourbon Steward. That sounds like a fun job to have. And is a certified destination management executive. And she's the creator of the Bourbon Line, or B-Line Bourbon Tourism Initiative for Northern Kentucky. And in her spare time, if she has any, Julie also sits on many boards throughout the Northern Kentucky region and the Commonwealth of Kentucky, including the boards for the Cincinnati Music Festival, Film Cincinnati, and is currently president of Meeting Professionals International. Julie, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Pat. It's great to be here today.
I'm sure you have one of those jobs that every day 15 people say, I'd love to have that job.
They do. You know what? I really am blessed. This is an amazing job to represent Northern Kentucky. We always say we're selling fun. We're selling the experience, and I believe you can't have any more fun than right here in this place we call home.
Yeah, and you do a great job. It's not just you were in the right place at the right time. You do a wonderful job, Julie.
Thank you.
I've worked with Julie for years. She used to manage sales for the Marriott River Center, so she is a veteran in our industry. So, Julie, we're here to talk about the B-Line and also Kentucky's Edge, the big conference coming to the Northern Kentucky Convention Center in our region this fall that'll bring people from all over the world really here. But let's start off with the bourbon industry. And in general, what does that mean to Northern Kentucky, Covington, the whole Commonwealth, from a dollar standpoint as well as the prestige and building of the brand of the state?
Absolutely. So bourbon is Kentucky's signature industry. 95% of the country and the world's bourbon is made right here in the state of Kentucky. And that is close to a $9 billion industry. So when you talk about economic impact, bourbon makes it, it brings jobs, but even more it brings growth and it brings visitors. So if you look at, and I think all of your folks that are watching will know Maker's Mark and Buffalo Trace and Jim Beam, the big signature distilleries in the state of Kentucky, bring in more than 1 million visitors a year. But I don't know if your watchers are going to know that we have 5 distilleries right here in Northern Kentucky. We have New Riff, Boone County Distilling, which is out in Independence. We have Old Pogue, which is in Maysville. We have the Neely Family Distillery, which is in Sparta, amazing new distillery. And we also have Second Sight, which is in Ludlow. So we have a big bourbon base here in Northern Kentucky, but I don't know if a lot of people in this region know about the amazing bourbon history we have in this region.
Tell us more. Tell us about some of the fun facts that people may not know.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people knew that. This port, this Covington, Newport, Cincinnati port, before Prohibition, all of the bourbon was coming out of this port. And it was going down to New Orleans, where it was being sold on Bourbon Street. So I'm sure you can see the connection there a little bit.
Yeah.
But this was a very thriving bourbon area. We found out our offices, in fact, are on the River Center. They're in the River Center Towers. That used to be a bourbon distillery back before Prohibition. Again, Prohibition killed a lot of the industry, and we're really excited it's coming back now in this region.
Yeah, you're returning to your roots.
We are, and there's nothing more Kentucky or nothing more Commonwealth than when you start talking about bourbon.
So let's get into why bourbon is so important in Northern Kentucky, not just heritage.
Absolutely. So we started thinking 2 years ago, what do we have here that's bourbon-centric? We have the great distilleries. We have amazing bars and restaurants that are all about bourbon in Newport and Covington and Bellevue, Dayton, Fort Thomas, Ludlow. But what we really had was we have 70 million cars coming down I-75. And we have 9 million passengers going through CVG Airport. So we had a really good shot to make this the first taste of Kentucky bourbon. We went to the Kentucky Distillers Association, which is the organization that runs the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And we said we want to do something with bourbon in northern Kentucky besides just drink it. We want to do something fun with it. And they said we celebrate that because you all are a gateway to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And from that idea, the Beeline was born. And the Beeline is that experience of bars, distilleries, and restaurants that invite people to have their first sip of Kentucky bourbon when they cross the real bourbon line, which is the Ohio River. Because once you cross that, you're in bourbon country.
Yeah, it's more than the Mason-Dixon, isn't it?
That's right. We call it the bourbon line. We call it the bourbon line now.
I think some people may not understand how the Convention Bureau, how meetNKY makes money. And you talked about all the cars coming in, i.e. the visitors. Tell our audience a little bit about that, about how convention bureaus like yours and others, how they operate, where their money comes from, you know, to market our region as a destination.
Absolutely. I think we're really lucky in this region that we are taking 3 counties, 3 very incredible different counties, and marketing them all as one experience, you know, northern Kentucky. So our revenues come from the bed taxes that visitors pay when they're staying in our regional hotels. And we have 70 plus hotels right now, not counting the 6 that are getting ready to open in the Florence area. And every time a visitor stays in one of our hotels, they pay a sales tax and they also pay an occupancy tax. And the tax comes to meetNKY, and we use that to build programs and book conventions and meetings and groups to influence more visitors to come here. And we find that for every dollar we spend of the taxpayers' money, which we do spend very responsibly, we get $40 back at impact. And that is a huge ROI for us.
That's great. That's great. And it's wonderful work that you do for Covington and all the other communities in northern Kentucky. Recently, there was an announcement about the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour. Talk to us about what that is and why that's important.
Right. So the Kentucky Bourbon Trail is broken into basically 2 sides. There's the main Kentucky Bourbon Trail, which is your Maker's Mark, your Jim Beam, your big distilleries, and then there is the craft tour. Just as in craft beer, there is Budweiser and there is Miller, there are also the craft side of the organization. So these Kentucky distillery craft tour distilleries, they're smaller on scale, but they're much more unique where you get to understand and see the art of making bourbon. In a big distillery, they're wonderful tours and it's very highly scripted. But when you're in a craft distillery, the person giving your tour is probably also the guy making the bourbon who also has to run out and sign for a delivery. So you're seeing a very unique experience. And as I said earlier, we have 5 of those distilleries here in northern Kentucky. New Riff, probably being one of the most well-known, is probably on the larger side of craft trail distilleries. And what has happened at New Riff in the last 2 years with their bourbon release it really has put a flag down for this region on being bourbon-centric. So the Kentucky Bourbon Trail Craft Tour was a smaller tour, but they have recently expanded that to 20 stops. And through our work in the Beeline, our alliances as part of Cincinnati, CVG Airport, they have actually broken that trail now into 4 very distinct regions. So you complete a region and you get this really cool challenge coin. And I am really proud that our Northern Challenge coin has our beloved Roebling Bridge on it, because I just think that is iconic for who we are.
Right.
It's really exciting.
And you talked about the craft experience in the same way as beers. In bourbon, people are so in love with the experience that it's not just the flavor and the taste. It's all the details of how it's made. That is critically important, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's all the heritage. It's where they get their grain from. It's, you know, if you're a bourbon nerd, by no means am I a bourbon nerd, but I think I could be if I wanted to be. You know, you get into the yeast strains of bourbon, and really the magic happens in making bourbon where bourbon is stored in the rick house or the warehouse. So if your barrel's up higher, it's different than the barrel that's down lower. And you could spend days just learning about all these little nuances of bourbon.
Yeah. It's time for us to take a short break. You're watching Getting Down to Business on TBNK, and we'll be right back.
1 in 3 adults has pre-diabetes. 1 in 3. That means it could be you, your favorite brother, your other brother, you, your football buddy, your football buddy, you, the boss's boss. If 1 in 3 adults has pre-diabetes, that means it could be you, your barber, your barber's barber.
Nice work.
Thanks.
You, your plumber,
Breathe right into your foot.
your plumber's masseuse.
Yes.
You, your dog walker,
On your left.
your cat jogger. Or you, your co-pilot, your co-pilot's co-pilot. While 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, with early diagnosis, prediabetes can be reversed. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org to know where you stand.
And welcome to Getting Down to Business. I'm Pat Frew. Welcome back. We're glad you're joining us for today's program, where we're talking with Julie Kirkpatrick, the Vice President of meetNKY, or the Northern Kentucky Convention Bureau. We're talking about the Beeline, and now we're going to get into the Kentucky's Edge conference coming up this fall in Covington. And tell us about that program, the dates, and what is all involved and where all these experiences are happening, Julie.
We're really excited. You know, we have a very great partner in the Northern Kentucky Chamber that decided that they wanted to, just as our Cincinnati friends, create some kind of signature event that gave a brand to Northern Kentucky, just as Oktoberfest does for Cincinnati, just as Blink does. Kentucky's Edge is going to be a first-time festival, October 4th and 5th, but this is not going to be a traditional festival by any means. Just as your Bourbon and Beyond in Louisville, which is a gated experience, this is an experience that's going to completely take over Covington and Newport. You will have free music, wonderful free music on the riverfront and in Roebling Point and down near Braxton. You will have a major education conference at the Northern Kentucky Convention Center with master distillers. Molly Wellman will be there teaching an old cocktail class, which should be exciting. And then you're also going to have some major music acts at the Madison Theater. But the unique experience of Kentucky's Edge is going to be all of the bars and restaurants in Covington and Newport that are going to be offering these amazing bourbon experiences that you can't have anywhere else. You'll have master distillers doing tastings and bars, bourbons that you would not find on any shelf anywhere that are going to come out of people's dusty attics for this event. So it really takes over the whole urban campus. And the hope for this, with the Chamber and their great signature partners that are funding this, is that it puts down a footprint, that this is an edgy place. It's a talent attracting place. It's some place that people want to visit and then eventually live and then hopefully open a business.
Tell us a little bit of the background of how this evolved into this conference.
Yeah, so Kentucky's Edge was an idea and a brainchild by the Northern Kentucky Chamber that then put together a very unique partnership model where traditionally when events are hosted, you go out and you say, give me $10,000, you give me $5,000. The Chamber built an event fund, and they've actually built a board that is going to be producing a lot of events for this. So an investment, for example, St. Elizabeth has made a major investment in Kentucky's Edge and this festival fund. They will sit on the board and be able to shape what the future of that looks like. And of course, any profits that come from an event like this are going to go back into the event fund to continue to build more and more events.
Is it your intent to do this every year?
It is our intent to do this every year, and the event producer for Kentucky's Edge is a man that a lot of people may know, Bill Donabedian, who built Bunbury, Bellwether, Brandemonium. He is a great event producer. We hope that this becomes the South by Southwest for bourbon, because it's going to be very edgy and it's going to be very different.
Give us an idea, with a typical convention model, you say it's going to attract this many visitors into the region. But from what you're telling me, that may be kind of difficult to figure out, because you've got all these musical concerts that will probably bring in people from out of town, as well as the people who are formal attendees of the convention.
Right.
So give us an idea what those numbers look like. And I would imagine people will be coming from all over the world
They
to
are.
attend this.
They are. So this target is more of a national audience because of the uniqueness of bourbon. Now, we're very lucky in that the Kentucky'sEdge.com website is the main portal to build all these experiences. You can actually go on this Kentucky'sEdge.com website and build your weekend. You can build your bourbon brunch. You can add in your bourbon tasting. I want to go to this concert. So you will be able to track traffic through that website. And I think it's going to be very unique. We partnered with NKU to do an economic impact study because, of course, we want to show that this has value to the community.
And again, what are the numbers? How many people do you think will come? And
More than one and less than 1 million. So I'll be a little vague on that. It's a first-time event.
Right.
I'm thinking that if we bring in 5,000 to 10,000 people that wouldn't have come to the northern Kentucky, Cincinnati region except for this festival, that's a big win. But I think of all the residents, the people in Hamilton and Butler and Warren County that don't even know how close they are to bourbon country. They are literally right over the beeline.
Can you talk a little more, Julie, about the experience? You talked about some of the different flavors and styles and brands of bourbon. Any examples of some things that people might not even normally conceive of that wouldn't be available over the counter, let's say? So yeah.
So I think when you start talking about unique bourbons, there's what we call an allocated bourbon. That's a hard bourbon to find. I think probably the most famous allocated bourbon is Pappy Van Winkle. Everyone knows about Pappy. Well, Pappy is made by Buffalo Trace in Frankfurt. They make a lot of great bourbons. They're also allocated. But Buffalo Trace will be at Kentucky's Edge doing samplings of some of those bourbons that you can't get your hands on. So you have to get on the website and buy that package and put it in your experience to try that.
That's neat. What else is going on in the planning of this Kentucky's Edge conference, and what's the best way for people to find out more and get involved and get engaged? I imagine you're going to need a lot of volunteers too.
A lot of volunteers. There are still sponsorship partnerships available. You know, anyone can go on the Kentucky'sEdge.com website and find out more information about the festival, and we hope everyone puts it on their calendar for October 4th and 5th, and then also holds out time and maybe stays in market to take advantage of Blink the very next weekend.
Right, that's going to be a massive weekend with Blink coming to Covington for the first time and extending south of the river. So that's kind of like a conventioneer's dream, isn't it?
It's you know, really, if I was going to say what was my perfect, you know, trifecta, it would be to have a bourbon festival one weekend and then this immersive light experience the next weekend. And I'm so happy both of them are coming together, and they're both taking advantage of a regional approach. And I think that bridge, if you look on the Kentucky's Edge website, you're going to see the Roebling Bridge. It's there. That's the connection point. And Blink is lighting the bridge. And I think that's going to be wonderful for everyone in the region to put on their calendar and come see.
In your line of work, are you foreseeing that people will come for the Kentucky's Edge and stay for Blink, that they'll be here over, say, a 10-day period or so?
We're building packages that way, and the way that we're marketing in Chicago and Minneapolis and Toronto and St. Louis is encouraging people to make that fall break here, and that long break.
And all the rain's going to be gone by then, right? Too,
I hope. I'll do my rain dance. I'll drink a little bourbon if it does. If it doesn't.
What was there anything else that you wanted us to talk about today that we haven't covered so far, as we've explored the history of bourbon, the importance of the Heritage Year, and this big event coming up this fall?
I think the last thing I would want to mention is that all of these events, and especially the Bean Line, we would not be successful if it was not for the strength of our airport, of CVG Airport. And, you know, CVG, with even more flights announced every day, it just opens up new markets for us to go and tell our Cincinnati story. So I have very high hopes that maybe we'll hear more international announcements in the coming years, but I can't even keep up with all of the domestic announcements.
Right, and I think that's kind of the next step that the airport would like to see, is growth in the number of international flights. And I would have to think that this conference is going to do nothing but help that.
It is going to help that. And we already market in France, Great Britain, and Ireland, and they are very whiskey curious. So to be able to get them here and give them a real thing to focus around, because those travelers come into market for 14 to 21 days. And this would be a great first stop on their American adventure.
Julie, I appreciate all the work that you and the folks at meetNKY do, and thank you so much for being on our program today.
Thank you, Pat. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So we've been visiting with Julie Kirkpatrick. She's the Vice President of meetNKY, the Northern Kentucky Convention Bureau. We've been talking about the history of bourbon, the Bee Line, which is taking hold throughout Northern Kentucky, which, as she told us, has become the gateway of bourbon into the Commonwealth. And we've also been talking about the Kentucky's Edge International Conference that will be coming to the Convention Center and supplemented with music and all types of entertainment in early October. So we want to thank you again for watching Getting Down to Business. It's a partnership with the Covington Business Council and TBNK. We want to thank TBNK for being a great partner on this program. I'm Pat Frew, your host, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.